The light falling on you right now left the sun 8 minutes ago. In those 8 minutes, the sun has gone on burning and turning and throwing storms across its surface, and none of it has reached you yet. You are not seeing the sun. You are seeing a picture of the sun that is already 8 minutes out of date. And there is no way to get a fresher one, because nothing in the universe outruns the light that carries the image. This is not a limit of your eyes. It is the rule that everything obeys. Every star you have ever looked at, you looked at late. The further away a thing sits, the older the version of it you are allowed to have. And if that holds for the sun and for every star, then it holds for us. Somewhere far enough out, the only humanity that can be seen at all is a humanity from years ago, or from centuries ago, or from millions of years ago. A version that may not be there anymore, which leaves a question I cannot put back down. In the only way the universe is able to check, are we even still here? Tonight, we are going to take that question seriously and follow it all the way out. By the end of this, you will understand why there is no single moment called now that the whole universe agrees on, why the only trace of us that anything distant can ever hold is a signal that may outlast the people who sent it, and why the sky could be quietly full of the already gone while looking no different from a sky that is simply empty. None of this rests on anything strange or unproven. It is the plain shape of light and distance and time, followed honestly to the place it leads. If questions like this one are the kind you like to sit with, a quiet subscribe helps these videos reach the people who do. Start with the nearest star, because it is the one you can check for yourself. The sun sits about 150 million kilometers from where you are standing. Light is fast, faster than anything else there is, moving at almost 300,000 kilometers in a single second. And even at that speed, crossing the gap from the sun to your eyes takes a little over 8 minutes. 8 minutes and 20 seconds, give or take. So the sunlight on your skin right now did not leave the sun this instant. It left more than 8 minutes ago, and it has been in flight the entire time, crossing all that empty space to reach you. This carries a consequence that most people never sit with. You are not seeing the sun. You are seeing where the sun was, and what it was doing 8 minutes into the past. If the sun were to simply stop, to go dark in a single instant, you would not know for those 8 minutes. You would feel its warmth, see its light, watch it hang there in the sky exactly as before, and every part of that would be a recording already finished at the source. The Earth would even keep curving around it, held in its orbit by a star that in this picture is no longer there because the pull of gravity does not arrive any faster than the light does. For 8 full minutes, nothing at all would tell you anything had changed. The sky would go on showing you a sun that had already ended. Once you notice this about the sun, you begin to see it everywhere. The moon is close, only a little more than 1 light second away, so you see it as it was about a second and a third ago. That is nearly nothing, but it is not zero. Even the things sharing this space with you arrive late. The light bouncing off your own hand reaches your eye a few billionths of a second after it leaves the skin. You have never once seen your hand in the present. You have only ever seen the most recent past that light was able to carry to you. And the same is true of every face you have ever looked at and every word you have ever read. None of this is a flaw waiting to be fixed. It is not a lag in the wiring that a sharper eye or a faster nerve could close. It is the rule the whole universe runs on. Information does not travel faster than light, ever, by any method we have found or have any reason to expect we will. Light is not simply how you happen to see, it is the fastest that any news can move from one place to another, the hard ceiling on how quickly the universe is able to tell you anything about itself. And because that ceiling is real, distance stops being only a matter of space. Distance becomes time. The further away a thing sits, the deeper into its past you are forced to look, with no way around it and no exception anywhere. Step outward, and the gap widens quickly. Light from Jupiter, when it is on our side of the sun, takes around 40 minutes to reach us. We see the great storm on its face as it was most of an hour ago. The light from Neptune, far out on the cold edge of the planets, is roughly 4 hours old by the time it gets here. The small craft we have sent to those worlds had the same problem in reverse. A picture taken out there was already hours stale before its signal even began the long crawl home. And these are our neighbours. These are the closest large bodies to us in all of space, and already we are seeing them not as they are but as they were, by minutes, by hours. Now leave the Sun behind entirely. The nearest star to us after our own is Proxima Centauri, a dim red speck about 4.2 light-years away. That phrase, light year, is doing something exact. It is the distance light covers in a single year, and 4.2 of them means the light touching a telescope tonight left that star more than 4 years ago. The Proxima Centauri anyone can find in the southern sky is a picture more than 4 years old. If something happened to it last week, or last month, or last year, you would have no way of knowing and would not know for years to come. And Proxima is the close one. It is the nearest star there is. Everything else is further, which means everything else is older. Look up on a clear night and you are not seeing a single moment at all. You are seeing a collage of different pasts stitched into one sky. The moon, a second old. The planets, minutes or hours old. The nearest stars, years old. The brighter, more distant ones, centuries old. Their light set out while sailing ships was still the fastest way across an ocean. The faint band of the galaxy's far side, older still. Every point of light in that view left its source at a different time, and the picture you call the night sky is really thousands of separate images, each one captured at a different moment, all arriving at your eye together and pretending to be one scene. Some of those points may not be there anymore. A star you can pick out and name tonight could have ended its life 1,000 years ago, and the light still arriving is only the part of its glow that was already on the road when it happened. You would go on seeing it shine, steady and familiar, for as long as that old light kept coming. There is no alert, no flicker, no way for the sky to mark the difference between a star that is still burning and one whose light is all that remains of it. I will come back to that, because it turns out to sit very close to the heart of all this. For now it is enough to notice that the sky does not separate the living from the long gone. It cannot. It only shows you light, and light says nothing at all about whether its source still exists. There is something humbling in that once it settles in. We tend to treat seeing as the most direct kind of knowing there is. You see a thing, so it is there, so it is real, so it is happening now. But seeing is the slowest kind of certainty we have, because it leans on light, and light has to travel, and travelling takes time. Everything you have ever seen, you saw after the fact. The only present you ever truly sit inside is the one right at your own skin, and even that you catch a hair late, push outward past your own body, and the lateness only grows, smoothly, without any limit, until at the far end of it the word now has been pulled so thin that it stops describing anything you could point to. It helps to lay the distances out as a ladder, because the rungs make the idea concrete. The moon, a little over 1 second into the past. The sun, 8 minutes. Jupiter, around 40 minutes when it is near. The outer edge of the planets, several hours. The nearest star, 4 years. And it keeps climbing from there without a break. The star we call the North Star, the one that has guided travellers for as long as there have been travellers, sits something like 400 light-years away, which means the steady point of light you would steer by tonight left that star around the time the first telescopes were being turned toward the sky. You are navigating by a 400-year-old picture of a star, trusting a light that is older than the practice of trusting it. The shapes we draw in the sky make this stranger still, because they are not real groupings at all. The stars of a constellation look neighbourly, arranged into a figure, but they are scattered at wildly different distances, one of them perhaps 50 light-years off, and the one apparently beside it 500, with nothing but our line of sight tying them together. So a constellation is not a thing in space. It is a chance alignment of lights from completely different distances, and therefore from completely different times, a pattern that exists only from here and only now, made of glints that left their sources centuries apart. The hunter, or the bear, or the cross you trace up there, is a collage of separate eras, pressed flat against the sky, and pretending to be a single shape caught in a single moment. And every rung of that ladder runs in the other direction too. The light that left Earth 400 years ago is 400 light years out by now, washing past that same North Star, carrying the look of a world that had not yet imagined most of what we are. The light that left 1,000 years ago is 1,000 light years out, and the light from the deep past of the planet is deeper still into space, an expanding archive of every era Earth has ever had, each one frozen at the radius its light has reached. We are not only the receivers of old pictures, we are the senders of them, throwing our entire past outward in light, one shell for every moment we have ever lived through, all of them still travelling. There is a quieter way to say all of this. The present you actually occupy is not a great slice of the universe holding still at one shared instant. It is a single point here at you right now, and everything beyond it is the past, arranged in order of distance, the near things only slightly behind, and the far things deeply behind. You do not live inside a present moment that fills space. You live at the tip of a long backward-reaching cone, able to see only what has had time to reach you, with the genuine present of every distant place, sealed off behind the speed of light, out of reach for good. The now you feel so certain of is yours alone, and it is very, very small. Push the ladder all the way to its top rung, and the idea reaches a kind of limit. The most distant galaxies we can find sit so far off that their light has been crossing space for most of the age of the universe, billions of years, leaving them when they were raw and young and still forming. We are not seeing those galaxies. We are seeing their infancy, a portrait taken when the universe itself was a fraction of its current age, and the galaxies in that portrait have long since grown old, or merged, or scattered into shapes we will never get to see because the light carrying the new shapes has not been made yet, or has not had time to arrive. The deepest images we have ever taken of the universe are images of a past so old that almost nothing in them still exists in the form we are looking at. So there is no such thing, even in principle, as a picture of the universe as it is right now. You could never gather it, not with any instrument, not from any vantage, because the light from each part arrives carrying a different age, and there is no place to stand where all of it would be current at once. A snapshot of everything as it is this instant is not a thing the universe will allow you to take. The only honest map is the one we are forced to use, a map where the near things are slightly old and the far things are deeply old and the farthest things are ancient, all of it layered together, none of it now, which leaves the present as something far smaller and more local than it feels. The community of things you share a present with is not the universe, and not the galaxy, and not even the solar system. It is here, immediate, right around you, on a scale where light crosses the gap so fast that the delay does not matter. Step beyond that and you step into the past, gradually at first, and then without limit. The now you live in is real, but it is a small island, and the ocean around it is entirely the past, arranged by distance, with no far shore where another present is waiting. Even our nearest neighbour is not a single thing seen at a single moment. What we call the closest star is really a group of three, two of them bound together and a third, Proxima, drifting nearby, and they sit at slightly different distances from us, a small spread of light months between them. So when you look toward that corner of the sky, the light from one of them is a touch older than the light from another, and the picture you get of the system is stitched together from three slightly different times. There is no instant at which you see all three as they simultaneously are. There is only the light from each, arriving on its own schedule, set by its own distance, assembled by your eye, into something that looks like one place caught in one moment and is nothing of the kind. So here is where that points, and where the rest of this is going to live. If everything out there reaches us late, by an amount that climbs steadily with distance, then the same has to be true in the other direction. The light leaving Earth this instant, carrying whatever we are and whatever we happen to be doing, is crawling outward at that same fixed speed, reaching the nearer stars in years and the further ones in centuries. To anything far enough away, we are a delayed picture too, and that is the thing I cannot stop turning over. If the sun is 8 minutes old, how old is everything else? And how far back does the delay reach before the idea of now stops meaning anything at all? Here is the correction that the rest of this depends on, and it is sharper than the way the question usually gets asked. When people hear that a star might have died and we are still seeing its old light, they picture a kind of cosmic news delay. The event happened, out there, at some definite moment, and the bulletin is simply slow to arrive. The star really is dead now, they think, and we just have not been told yet. That picture feels obvious. It is also wrong, and the way it is wrong is the whole point. The trouble is the word now, stretched across a gap of light years. We use it as if there were a single clock ticking behind the entire universe, marking off one shared present that every place passes through together. There is no such clock. There is no master now that the galaxy keeps for everyone at once. This is not a soft or poetic claim. It is one of the most thoroughly tested results in all of physics, and it has a plain name. Simultaneity is relative. Whether two events far apart count as happening at the same time is not a fixed fact. It depends on who is asking and how they are moving, and there is no observer anywhere whose answer is the correct one. That sounds like a technicality until you see what it does at large distances, and there is a clean way to see it. Picture two people out under the open sky, passing each other on a walk, one strolling in one direction and one strolling the other, at no more than an ordinary walking pace. Nothing strange about them at all. Now ask each of them what is happening right now in the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years away, because their slow motions tip their slices of the present by the tiniest angle, and because that tiny angle is carried across an immense distance, their two versions of right now in Andromeda can fall days apart. In one person's present, a fleet has not yet launched from some world over there. In the other person's present, walking the other way at the speed of a quiet stroll, it already has. Both of them are equally correct. The universe offers nothing to break the tie. Sit with how strange that is. Two people in the same place, at the same moment by any local reckoning, walking past each other gently, genuinely disagree about what is happening at the same instant somewhere far away, and neither one is making a mistake. There is no fact hiding underneath their disagreement that would settle it. The shared presence they both assume is real simply does not exist at that distance. It dissolves into a fan of possible nows, one for every state of motion, none of them the true one. The further away the place in question, the wider that fan spreads, until across millions of light years even a footstep's worth of motion smears the present across days, then years. So the honest statement is not the one people reach for. It is not we cannot yet tell whether the star has died. It is something stranger and harder. For events far enough apart, there is no observer independent answer to whether one has happened yet when the other does. The question assumes a shared present tense, a single now spanning the distance, and that present tense is exactly the thing that does not stretch. Out past a certain separation, has it happened yet stops being a question with a hidden answer and becomes a question with no answer at all, because the frame you would need to settle it does not exist. I want to be careful here, because this is the part that the intuition fights hardest. It feels like there must be a real now everywhere. It feels like the universe, whatever we can or cannot measure, must be doing something definite at this exact instant in Andromeda, in Proxima, on every world there is. That feeling is almost impossible to switch off. I cannot switch it off either, and I have thought about this for a long time. But the feeling is not evidence. Everything we have been able to test says the universe keeps no such universal clock, and the experiments that confirm it are not exotic. The satellites that tell you where you are on the ground only work because their clocks are corrected for exactly this, for the fact that time and simultaneity bend with motion and position. The effect is small in daily life. It is not small across the distances we are talking about. None of this makes the delay go away. Light still takes its 8 minutes from the Sun, its 4 years from Proxima, its 2.5 million years from Andromeda. The lateness is real and fixed. What dissolves is the comforting idea sitting behind the lateness, the idea that there is still a true present out there, that we are simply seeing on a delay. There is the delay, and there is what arrives, and there is what is still on its way. There is no further layer underneath where the real now is quietly keeping time for everyone. The light is not a late report on a present that exists somewhere else. For anything far enough away, the light is the most that the word now will support. And this is where the question we started with changes shape. To ask whether humanity is still here, right now, sounds like it should have a yes or a no. Standing on Earth among other people, on a scale of a few light milliseconds, it does. We can all agree on the present in a place this small. But the instant you ask it from far away, from the vantage of something 1,000 light years off, or 1,000,000, the question quietly loses its footing. There is no single present we share with that distant place in which the answer could be fixed. There is only what our light has so far delivered to it, and what is still crossing the dark on the way. There is a clean way physicists draw this, and it makes the strangeness exact. Around any moment of your life there is a region of events you could in principle affect or be affected by, the things close enough that light can bridge the gap in the time available. And there is a far larger region, everything too far away for light to have crossed yet, that you can neither touch nor be touched by, neither see as it is nor influence at all. That second region has a name. It is sometimes called the elsewhere. And for events out there, the words before, after, and at the same time simply do not carry fixed meanings. Whether a distant event lies in your past, your future, or your present is not settled by the universe. It is settled, if at all, only by an arbitrary choice of how you are moving, and any other choice is just as valid as yours. Go back to the two walkers and shrink the difference between them to feel how little it takes. One of them stops walking entirely and just stands still. The other strolls in the direction of Andromeda at the pace of a slow walk. That tiny difference in motion, nothing you could even notice between two people on a street, is enough to slide their two versions of the present in Andromeda apart by days, because the great distance does the amplifying. Put one of them in a car on a motorway, and the slide grows to years. The faster the motion and the greater the distance, the wider the present smears, and there is no speed slow enough to make it vanish. Even standing perfectly still, your present in Andromeda is only one choice among many, no truer than the version held by someone drifting past you at a crawl. I want to flag honestly where the solid physics ends and the open questions begin, because they are different things and it matters not to blur them. That simultaneity is relative, that there is no universal now. This part is settled, tested, and beyond serious doubt. What it means underneath is not settled at all. Some physicists take the absence of a shared present to mean that past, present, and future all exist equally, that the universe is laid out complete in time the way a landscape is laid out complete in space, and that the flow of now is something we add rather than something the universe contains. Others resist that hard and look for a way to keep a real present. That argument is open, and serious people fall on different sides of it. I am not going to pretend it is closed, but every side of it agrees on the one part we need here, which is that no single now stretches across the distances we are talking about. So when the question is whether something far away exists right now, the trouble is not in the answer. The trouble is in the now. The word smuggles in an assumption the universe will not honor past a certain distance, the assumption of one shared instant that every place passes through together. Strip that assumption out and the question does not get a different answer. It stops being a question. There is what has reached the distant place and what has not yet, and no hidden presence sitting behind the light where the real state of things is quietly kept. The light is not a delayed bulletin about a present elsewhere. Past a certain distance, the light is as much of a present as there is. None of this is fragile or speculative at the level we are leaning on it, and that is worth being firm about, because the conclusions sound strange enough that it is fair to ask whether the foundation can bear them. It can. The relativity of time and simultaneity is not a clever idea waiting for confirmation. It is built into the working of things we rely on without thinking, the timing systems that let machines on the ground agree on where they are, the behavior of fast-moving particles that live measurably longer than slow ones, the corrections that keep clocks in orbit in step with clocks below. The universe has been telling us for a long time, in plain and repeatable ways, that there is no single clock behind everything. We simply do not feel it, because at the speeds and distances of an ordinary life, the effect is far too small to notice. There is one consequence of this that I find genuinely hard to sit with, and I will name it rather than smooth it over. If a distant observer's present can contain a slice of our future, an event that for us has not happened yet, then in some real sense that event is already as fixed and as real as our past, sitting out there in the layout of things, waiting only for us to arrive at it. That is the picture some physicists draw from all this, a universe spread out complete in time, where the sense of one moment flowing into the next is something minds add rather than something the world does. I am not telling you that picture is certainly correct. It is genuinely disputed, and reasonable people hold the other view, but the door to it is opened by exactly the same physics we have been using, and it is not a door I can pretend is shut. What I will hold to, because every interpretation agrees on it, is the narrower thing. The present does not travel. It is not a wave of nowness sweeping through the universe, keeping everything current together. There is what has arrived at a given place, and what is still on its way to it, and nothing underneath that arrangement playing the role of a true, shared, universal instant. When we ask what is happening far away right now, we are reaching for a thing the universe does not keep. And that means the question we started with was never going to have the kind of answer it seemed to promise. Which forces a more concrete question, and it is the one the next stretch of this is built on. If there is no shared now that reaches across the distance, then a faraway observer cannot point to the living, breathing us and check whether we are still going. They can only point to whatever has actually arrived where they are. So what, in plain physical terms, is the humanity that such an observer can lay a hand on? What have we actually sent out into space that anything beyond Earth could ever receive and hold? Because that, and only that, is the version of us the universe is in any position to know. So here is what we have actually sent. Around the Earth, expanding outward in every direction at the speed of light, there is a thin and growing shell of stray radio. It is the leakage of a planet that started talking to itself with electromagnetic waves and could not help spilling some of that into space. Every broadcast tower, every early television transmitter, every powerful radar sweep threw a portion of its energy upward and outward, past the air, into the dark, where nothing slows it down. That spilled energy has been climbing away from us ever since, a bubble of human noise swelling around the planet, and its leading edge marks the absolute furthest that any sign of us has reached. Put a rough age on that edge. The strong, steady leakage really begins somewhere in the 1930s and 40s, with high-power broadcasting, and even more with radar. Take the earlier end of that, and the front of our radio shell has now travelled something on the order of 90 to 100 and some light years from Earth. That number is the entire radius of the region in which our world has ever announced itself, on purpose or by accident. It is a sphere a little under 200 light-years across, centered on a single small planet, and it is the true and complete extent of our footprint in space. Outside it, there is no version of Earth that has ever made an electromagnetic sound. It helps to picture that shell as a place rather than a number, because it is washing over real things. The very oldest of our leaked signals, the ones that set out in the 1940s, have by now swept past the nearest several hundred stars. They long ago crossed Proxima Centauri and the rest of the Alpha Centauri group, only 4 light-years out, which our earliest broadcasts reached before the 1950s were over. They have passed Barnard's star, and Sirius, and Vega, and hundreds of other suns, each one bathed, for a faint moment, in the spreading edge of our oldest radio. If anything were sitting at one of those stars with the right kind of ear, the front of our noise would already have arrived, carrying the first faint evidence that this planet had woken up and started transmitting. And the shell keeps growing, by 1 light-year of radius every year, without anyone doing anything. Right now its edge is rolling outward through a part of the galaxy thick with stars. Within 100 light-years of the Sun there are thousands of them, and our expanding bubble of stray radio is reaching more of them with every year that passes. In that sense, the question of whether we have made our presence felt in space has a clear answer. We have. There is a measurable physical region of the galaxy that now contains evidence of us, and it is getting larger at the only speed the universe allows, which is the speed of the light that carries it. But notice what that shell really is, and how thin it is in time. It is not a steady fact about us. It is a record of a particular stretch of our history, the few decades in which we happened to blast a lot of energy outward in a careless way. The innermost part of the shell, the signals leaving us now, looks different from the part near the edge, the signals from 80 years ago, because we transmit differently now than we did then. The shell is less a portrait of humanity than a thin sketch of one short era of it, drawn in radio and already stretched across nearly 200 light-years of space. There is also a hard limit on what that shell proves, and it matters for everything that follows. Inside the bubble, in principle, our signals are present. A receiver somewhere in there could, with enough sensitivity, find a trace of us in the noise. Outside the bubble, there is nothing. No amount of listening from beyond the edge can detect a planet whose signals have not yet arrived, because there is simply nothing there to detect. So at any given moment, the set of places in the entire universe that could possibly know we exist is exactly this one sphere, a couple of hundred light-years wide, drawn around a single ordinary star in an ordinary part of one galaxy among a great many. Everywhere else, and that is almost everywhere, we have not happened yet. That? I find it steadying and unsettling in equal measure to hold that in mind. We tend to imagine that once a civilization starts broadcasting, the galaxy somehow knows about it, as if the news travels on its own and fills the available space. It does not. It travels at the speed of light, no faster, and it has been traveling for less than a single human lifetime. Against the size of the galaxy, 100,000 light-years across, a shell 200 light-years wide is a pinprick. It is a faint ring of disturbance around one planet, and beyond it the galaxy carries on exactly as if we had never made a sound, because as far as it is concerned, we have not. Trace the front of our radio outward and you can almost date its passage star by star. The earliest strong leakage, from around the 1940s, reached the Alpha Centauri system 4 light-years out, before the 1950s were over. It washed past Sirius, the brightest star in our sky, about 8.5 light-years away. A few years after that, it reached Vega, 25 light-years off, during the 1960s. By now the front has rolled out past stars 90 and more light-years away, suns whose names most people have never heard, each one reached for the very first time by the faint leading edge of a planet that had only just learned to broadcast. There is a strange precision to it. For any star within that radius, there is a date, a real moment in the last 80 years when the first whisper of Earth arrived. And the shell is not blank noise. Buried in its structure, in principle, is a surprising amount about the planet that made it. As the Earth turns, the transmitters on its surface swing toward a given star and away again, so the signal a distant listener received would rise and fall in a daily rhythm, carrying the length of our day written into its timing. The clustering of those transmitters, dense over some regions and sparse over others, would trace a rough map of where the broadcasting happened. A patient enough listener could read the spin of the planet and the uneven spread of whatever was doing the transmitting, all from the pattern of the leakage alone, without ever decoding a single word of it. The shell is an autobiography we never meant to write, set down without our choosing, in the shape of our own noise. That is worth holding against the disk, because the two are opposites. The radio shell is something we never chose to send. It simply spilled out of us, the unavoidable overflow of a planet that had started using the airwaves, an honest accident of one noisy century. The disk on Voyager is the other thing entirely, chosen, composed, deliberate. One is the planet talking in its sleep, the other is the planet sitting down to compose a letter, and of the two, it is the accident that is wide and the letter that is far, the leakage that has touched hundreds of stars already, and the disk that has touched none, and will touch none, for tens of thousands of years. What the shell really is, when you stand back from it, is one short stretch of our history made permanent and set loose. Not all of us, not what we are now, and not what we were before, only the loud century, the few decades when we happen to throw a great deal of energy carelessly upward, expanding outward forever as a thin bright skin, with the quiet older Earth sealed inside it, and the quieter future Earth not yet added on. If anything ever reads it, that is the slice of us they will meet. The handful of decades when the planet was at its loudest, frozen into a sphere, racing away from a world that has already moved on from being that loud. It is worth being exact about the shape of this shell, because the word can mislead. It is not a thin film at one fixed distance. It is a filled sphere of layers, 80-some years deep, the oldest and faintest signals out at the leading edge and every later year stacked behind them, all the way back to the broadcasts leaving the planet at this moment, which form the innermost layer of all. Slice into it anywhere, and you would pass through year after year of Earth's noise, the loud middle of the last century buried somewhere in the thick of it, the quieter recent years nearer the centre. The whole structure swells outward together, the edge racing ahead at the speed of light, and the planet at its heart still feeding new layers in, for now. And against the size of the thing it sits inside, this sphere is almost nothing. Within 100 light years of the Sun there are something like 15,000 stars, which sounds like a great many until you set it beside the galaxy as a whole, with its hundreds of billions. Our shell, for all its reach, has touched a few thousand suns out of those hundreds of billions, a region you would struggle to even mark on a fair map of the galaxy without the dot vanishing. The overwhelming majority of stars have never received the faintest hint of us, and most of them never will, because the shell thins as it grows and will sink below any hope of detection long before it has crossed any serious fraction of the galaxy. That last point is the one that quietly undoes the comfort of the shell entirely. It is not permanent. As it expands, the same spreading that already buries our broadcasts in noise a few light years out keeps going, so that even the loud middle layers will eventually thin past the point where anything could pull them from the background. The shell is not a monument that lasts. It is a fading announcement, bright now in its inner layers, already lost at its edge, on its way to becoming undetectable everywhere it goes. Given enough time, the entire radio record of our loud century washes out into the same hiss it is already sinking toward, and the sphere of our noise becomes, for all purposes, silent. So the live broadcast of our existence, the one thing about us that is genuinely happening out there in real time, is a bubble that is faint at its edge, fading throughout, and ultimately temporary. It is the closest thing we have to a heartbeat reaching into space. And it is a heartbeat that grows weaker the further it gets and will, in the end, stop being audible at all. If that were the whole of our footprint, the honest verdict would be that we make a brief, soft sound and then go quiet, and the galaxy never quite makes us out before we fade. But the shell, for all its reach, is not the most durable thing we have sent. The most durable thing barely moves, and does not spread, and will still be legible long after the shell has dissolved into nothing. Still, the shell exists, and it is real, and it is the closest thing we have to a living signal of ourselves out in space. So it is worth pressing on it. We picture it as proof of life, a clean sphere of us racing outward and announcing the planet to anyone within range. That picture has a quiet assumption buried in it, that the signal is strong enough to be heard at all when it gets there, and that assumption turns out to be far shakier than it sounds. The real question is not how far our radio has travelled, it is whether by the time it arrives, there is anything left of it worth hearing. A radio signal does not hold together as it travels. It spreads. A transmitter on Earth throws its energy outward, and that energy fans across a larger and larger surface as it goes, so the power landing on any one patch of space falls away fast. Double the distance and the signal is a quarter as strong. Multiply the distance by 10, and it is 100th. By the time one of our broadcasts has crossed even a few light years, the part of it passing through any given square of space has thinned almost to nothing, sinking down toward the natural radio hiss that fills all of space on its own. The shell is still out there. It is just extraordinarily faint by the time it arrives anywhere. Put a real figure on how faint. People have worked out what it would take to pick up the ordinary leakage of Earth, the general spill of our broadcasts, from the distance of even 1 light year, which is far closer than the nearest star. The answer is a receiving dish so large it is essentially out of the question, hundreds of kilometers across, a structure beyond anything we have ever built or seriously expect to build. That is the size of ear you would need just to catch our background murmur from closer than our nearest neighbour. From the distance of an actual star, the requirement only grows more absurd. The plain truth is that our casual leakage, the radio and television glow we imagine flooding the neighbourhood, is for almost any realistic listener buried hopelessly in the noise. There is a part of our signal that does carry further, and it is worth being exact about it, because the exception sharpens the rule. The strongest things we send are not entertainment, they are the narrow, ferociously powerful beams of military and airport radar, the pulses we use to map the sky and track what moves through it. Those are concentrated and intense in a way a broadcast never is, and a listener at a nearby star, watching patiently over time, might just catch the rhythmic sweep of them rising and falling as the Earth turns. But that is a thin and strange portrait to be known by. It is not our music or our voices or anything we would recognize as ourselves. It is the cold tick of our radar, and even that sits near the edge of what a receiver like our own could pull out of the dark from a few light years off. Set yourself out at one of those nearby stars and ask what actually arrives. Not a planet full of voices, not a clear announcement that someone is here. What reaches that distance is a faint smear of power, spread thin across a band of frequencies, mostly sunk into the same radio hiss that the galaxy produces everywhere on its own, with perhaps a faint periodic flicker buried in it, if the listener is patient and well-equipped and happens to be looking. It is the murmur of a planet that is already nearly inaudible. You would have to know to look, and look hard, and look with instruments better than ours, and even then you might come away unsure whether you had heard a world or a trick of the noise. And the part that I keep returning to is that the trend runs the wrong way for being heard. The loud era is ending as our transmissions move onto cable down fibre through tightly aimed satellite links and low-power digital systems. less and less of our energy spills uselessly into space. The careless, high-power broadcasting that made the brightest part of our shell belongs to the middle of the last century. A planet at the height of analog television leaked far more into the dark than a planet streaming quietly over wires. So the brightest face we ever turned to the galaxy may already be behind us, expanding outward as a shell of old signals, while the Earth itself grows quieter year by year. We are not getting louder out there. By the measure that matters, we are fading. I have to be honest about the uncertainty in all of this, because it is real and it cuts both ways. Detectability is not a fixed line. It depends entirely on who is listening and with what, and on assumptions we cannot check about instruments we cannot see. A civilization far beyond us, with receivers we can barely imagine, might pull our faint shell out of the noise with ease, might read our radar and our fading broadcasts as plainly as we read a page. The history of people estimating how far our signals could be detected is a history of numbers that move around a lot, from a few light years to a few dozen, depending on the assumptions. So I will not tell you our shell is certainly unreadable. I will only tell you that on a fair comparison, judged by what a listener like ourselves could manage, the living signal of Earth is faint and thin and getting fainter, which quietly undoes the comforting version of our footprint. The shell is not a strong, steady beacon proving the planet is alive. It is a weak and spreading whisper, brightest in its oldest layers, dimming toward its newest, sinking towards silence the further it gets from home. If the only mark we had left on space were this, then the honest summary would be that we have barely made a sound the universe could hear, and that the little we did make is already on its way to being lost in the static. There is a popular image of all this that is worth correcting head-on, because it is almost exactly backwards. People like to say that our old television shows are out there racing across the galaxy, that some distant world is even now receiving our oldest broadcasts and watching along with us. It is a charming picture, and it is wrong. The signals are out there, yes, expanding in that shell, but watching along would require pulling a coherent broadcast out of a wash of energy that by the time it has crossed even a few light years has thinned far below the natural radio noise of space itself. There is no distant audience receiving our old programs. There is at most a faint statistical smudge that a vastly capable listener might, with enormous effort, notice as an anomaly in the static. The shows are not arriving anywhere watchable. They dissolved into noise almost as soon as they left. The one part that travels with any real reach is the part we would least choose as a calling card. Recent work modelling how Earth looks to a distant listener finds that our most detectable feature is the leakage from powerful radar, the airport and military systems that sweep the sky with intense, narrow beams. Seen from a handful of specific nearby stars, those sweeps would produce a faint but distinctive rhythm as the Earth rotates and the beams swing past. That is the clearest signal we send into the dark, not a greeting, not a voice, not music. The cold periodic tick of the machines we use to watch our own sky, just barely lifting above the noise from a few light years off, and sinking back into it not far beyond that. And the brightest of it is already behind us. The high-power, wide-open broadcasting that built the loud part of our shell belonged to the middle of the last century, and we have been quietly dismantling it ever since, moving onto cable and fibre and tightly aimed links that spill almost nothing upward. By some reckonings, the radio brightness of the Earth has already passed its peak and started down. I will be fair about the other side of this, because it is not settled. New systems, dense networks of satellites, kinds of transmitters we have not built yet, could shift the picture in ways that are hard to predict, and a future Earth might find fresh ways to leak. But the careless roar of the analog decades, the loudest we are known to have ever been, is most likely a thing we have already stopped doing, expanding outward now as an old shell while the planet beneath it grows quieter, which forces a kind of accounting. If our living signal, the radio that proves the planet is awake, Is this faint, this easily lost, and this likely to fade rather than grow? Then it is a poor candidate for the thing about us that lasts. Sound spreads, and weakens, and drowns. To leave a mark that endures, you would want something that does not spread, something that does not thin with distance, something that simply persists, carried rather than broadcast. You would want an object, and as it happens, we sent one, small and slow and solid, out ahead of the very signals that are now fading behind it. The reason our signal loses so badly is worth stating as the plain physical thing it is. A transmitter sends out a fixed amount of power, and as that power travels, it has to cover the surface of an ever larger sphere, so the share of it crossing any given patch of space falls away as the square of the distance. Go 10 times further, and the signal is 100th as strong. Go 100 times further, and it is 10,000th. Across the gap to even the nearest star, that dilution is brutal. And what began as a strong broadcast arrives as a trace so weak, it has to compete with the natural radio noise that fills all of space, the faint hiss left over from the early universe, and the steady murmur of the galaxy itself. Our signal does not arrive at a quiet place where it would stand out. It arrives at a place already full of soft noise, and it arrives weaker than that noise, and so it is lost in it. There is an assumption buried in the worry that aliens might be listening to us, and once you name it, the worry softens. We imagine them equipped with receivers far beyond ours, ears so sensitive they could pull our faint leakage out of the static with ease. Maybe some could, but the honest, symmetric assumption, the one that does not flatter anyone, is that a civilization roughly like ours, with instruments roughly like ours, would be as deaf to our leakage as we would be to theirs, and that symmetry cuts in a direction we rarely sit with. We have been listening carefully for decades, sweeping the nearby stars for any sign of a signal, and we have heard nothing. No greeting, no leakage, no rhythmic tick of someone else's radar. If the galaxy were full of planets as loud as we were at our loudest, we would still most likely hear silence, because that loudness does not survive the crossing. So the quiet works in both directions at once, and that is the part that ought to give us pause. Our signal is too faint to be heard from any real distance, which means we are far harder to detect than we like to think, and the same physics means that anyone else's signal would be just as faint by the time it reached us, which means the silence we hear is exactly what a galaxy full of quiet, ordinary, briefly loud civilizations would sound like. The lack of a signal proves almost nothing in either direction. Absence of a voice is not absence of a speaker. It might only be the distance, doing to their signal exactly what it does to ours. Which is why, if you want to leave a mark that the distance cannot erase, a signal is the wrong tool entirely. A signal is the thing that spreads and thins and drowns. What you would want instead is something that holds its shape, that does not dilute, that carries its message in solid form and simply waits. We built one of those too, and it is already further out than any signal we could send would be worth hearing. But the radio shell is not the only thing we have sent. It is the loudest in its brief way and the most widespread, but it is also the most fragile, the one most easily swallowed by distance and noise. There is something else out there carrying us, something far smaller and far slower, that does not spread out and does not fade into hiss, because it is not a signal at all. It is an object. It is a solid thing, built and launched and now drifting outward through the dark, and unlike our radio, it is designed to last. So if our living signal is this faint and this temporary, the question becomes simple and a little grim. What is the strongest, most durable mark we have actually placed in space, the one piece of us most likely to outlast everything else? It is not a broadcast. It is a small metal disc, and it is already further from home than anything human hands have ever sent. The strongest mark we have made in space is a disc about the width of a dinner plate, made of copper, plated in gold, fixed to the side of a small spacecraft that left Earth in 1977. The craft is Voyager 1, and it is the most distant object that human hands have ever made. Nothing we have built has gone further. It is so far away now that its radio signal, moving at the speed of light, takes the better part of a full day to cross the gap between it and us. Next month it passes a line no built thing has ever passed. The distance at which that signal needs a whole day, 24 hours, to make the trip. We say good morning to it, and the answer does not arrive until the day after. It is worth holding the speed and the distance together to feel how strange its situation is. Voyager 1 is moving at roughly 17 kilometers every second, which is fast enough to cross a country in the time it takes to read a sentence, and it has been moving at that kind of pace for almost 50 years. And still, against the scale of the space it is crossing, it is barely creeping. It is now around 25 billion kilometers from the Sun, out past the planets, out past the edge of the Sun's wind, into the thin gas that lies between the stars. It will not come anywhere near another star for tens of thousands of years. The distances are so large that even our fastest, furthest traveller is by the measure of the galaxy almost standing still. Ride alongside it for a moment, out in that dark. There is almost nothing there. The Sun is just the brightest star in a sky full of them, too far now to feel as warmth. The temperature is barely above the coldest temperature there is. The craft moves through a near-perfect emptiness, a scattering of a few atoms per space the size of your hand, and fine grains of interstellar dust, smaller than anything you could see, drift against its skin at a few kilometers a second and chip microscopic craters into the metal, one tiny strike at a time, over ages. Bolted to the side of it, facing out into all of that, is the disk. And on the cover of the disk is the part that I keep coming back to. On that cover, electroplated onto the metal, is a small patch of ultra-pure uranium. Not as a power source, and not by accident. It is there to be a clock. Uranium of this kind decays at a fixed, known rate, shedding its atoms steadily, and half of any amount of it will have turned into other elements after about 4.5 billion years. That span has a name. It is the half-life, and it does not change, and it does not care about anything happening around it. So whoever finds the disk, however far in the future, can measure how much of the uranium is left, compare it to how much was there at the start, and read directly off the metal how long the thing has been drifting. The makers built a clock into the cover that would still be keeping time long after every other trace of them was gone. And the disk itself is built to survive the kind of time that clock is measuring, out in the near vacuum between the stars, with almost nothing to corrode it and only that slow rain of dust to wear it. A plate of gold and copper should remain intact, and its grooves should remain readable, for something on the order of 1 billion years, and very possibly far longer than that. Try to hold 1 billion years in your mind against anything human. The whole of recorded history is a few thousand years. The whole of our species is a few 100,000. 1 billion years ago, life on Earth had not yet figured out how to be more than single cells in the water. That is the kind of duration this small object is built to outlast, drifting and silent, with its uranium quietly counting the whole way. I should be honest about the odds that anyone ever finds it, because they are almost nothing. Space is mostly empty, overwhelmingly, almost unimaginably empty, and Voyager 1 is not aimed at anything. It is not heading for a star. It will pass within a couple of light years of a faint red dwarf called Gliese 445 in around 40,000 years, and a couple of light years is not an arrival, it is a near miss across a gulf, still far larger than the distance to our nearest neighbour. After that it simply keeps going, around the centre of the galaxy, for as long as the galaxy lasts, with no destination and no plan to be caught. On any honest accounting, the chance that some hand ever lifts that disk and reads it is so small it rounds to 0. Which tells you something about what the clock is really for. It was never truly built for a finder. The people who pressed that uranium onto the cover were not betting on rescue or reply. They were answering a question that will almost certainly never be asked, and they built the answer to stay accurate for 1 billion years regardless. The clock keeps perfect time whether or not anyone is ever there to read it. It will go on counting in the dark, exact and patient, long after the last of us is gone, marking the years against no one. There is something in that I find difficult to put down. We made a thing whose entire purpose only matters if it is found, and then we launched it on a path where it almost certainly never will be, and we made it last anyway. Consider what is actually pressed into that disk as an object sitting in the dark. Its grooves hold a set of recorded sounds and images chosen to stand for an entire planet, encoded the way a record encodes music, to be read by a fine needle that travels with it. The cover carries diagrams meant to explain, to anyone who has never encountered such a thing, how to play it, how fast to turn it, how to turn the stored signals back into pictures. It is a strange and touching piece of engineering, a message built to be understood by something that shares none of our language, none of our senses, none of our assumptions, resting on the hope that mathematics and the hydrogen atom are common ground. All of that, the sounds of a world and the instructions for hearing them, riding on a plate the width of a dinner plate, through a cold the deepest winter on Earth never approaches. It is not even the only one. Before the 2 Voyagers there were the 2 Pioneer craft, each carrying a simpler engraved plaque, and they too are drifting outward now, off on their own directions, silent and slow. And there are 2 Voyagers, not one, the second on its own path through the dark, with an identical disk fixed to its side. So there are several of these objects loose in the galaxy now, a small scattering of deliberate messages and a pair of older plaques, all of them launched within a few years of each other by a planet that, for one brief stretch, decided to throw bottles into the dark. None of them aimed at anything, all of them simply outbound, for good, unless something improbable reaches out and stops one. There is a hard line coming for the craft itself, and it is close, and it sharpens the whole thing. Voyager runs on a slowly fading source of power, and that source is almost spent. Within a few years, the last of its instruments will fall dark, the signal home will stop, and the spacecraft will become what it will be for the rest of its existence, a cold and silent piece of metal coasting outward, no longer reporting, no longer listening, simply moving. But the disk does not need power. The disk does not need the craft to be alive. When the machine finally goes quiet, the message rides on exactly as before, and the uranium on its cover keeps counting exactly as before, indifferent to whether the thing carrying it still works at all. The carrier dies. The message does not even notice. And the way a finder would read that clock is worth saying plainly, because it is the detail that gives me pause. They would not need our calendars or our words. They would only need to measure how much of the uranium remained and compare it to how much a fresh sample of that kind holds, and the difference, run through the fixed rate of decay, would tell them how long the disk had been drifting, in years, without us having to explain a single thing. It is a way of telling someone how much time has passed that depends on nothing shared except physics, which means the makers built into that cover a sentence that will still be legible and still be true 1 billion years from now, and the sentence it tells is simply this: this much time has gone by since the ones who made me were here. Think about where the craft is actually headed, because it is not headed anywhere in the way we usually mean the word. Voyager has already left the region the sun controls, the bubble of solar wind that marks the sun's local territory, and it is now moving through the general space between the stars. From here it does not orbit the sun in any meaningful sense anymore. It orbits the center of the galaxy, the way the sun does, the way every star does, on a slow circuit that takes something like 200 million years to complete. The craft has become in effect an independent member of the galaxy, a tiny one, drifting along with the great wheel of stars, no longer ours to steer, no longer tied to the planet that built it except by the diagram etched on the disk it carries. And it will keep that disk intact across spans that are hard to take seriously. The space it moves through is almost perfectly empty, a few atoms scattered through each handful of volume, and a sparse drift of fine dust, and at 17 kilometers a second those dust grains strike the craft and chip away at it, atom by atom, crater by microscopic crater. But the rate is so slow, and the disk so solid, that even after hundreds of millions of years of that faint sandblasting, the grooves should still hold their shape, and the cover should still carry its diagrams. The clock on the front, the patch of uranium, simply continues its decay through all of it, untouched by the dust, marking the years whether the craft is whole or slowly wearing down. The thing that keeps catching me is the sheer emptiness it is crossing, and what that emptiness does to the odds of the disk ever being read. Space is not sparsely furnished. It is to a degree that defeats the imagination, empty. The distance between stars is so large compared to the size of the stars themselves that an object moving in a straight line through the galaxy can travel for an unthinkably long time without passing close to anything at all. Voyager is one small disk moving through that emptiness, not aimed at any star, on a path chosen by the planets it once flew past rather than by any destination. The chance that its line happens to carry it near anything that could lift it and read it in all the time it will be out there is so close to nothing that nothing is the honest word for it. Which means the disk is in every practical sense a message launched into a dark that will almost certainly never open it. And yet it was built with total care, the grooves cut precisely, the diagrams worked out for a reader who shares nothing with us, the clock pressed on to keep accurate time for 1 billion years. We made a thing whose entire meaning depends on being found, knowing it would almost certainly never be found. And we made it to last anyway. There is a stubbornness in that I keep turning over, a refusal to let the unlikelihood of being heard be a reason for silence. We spoke into the dark precisely because the dark was there. And there are two of these disks, not one, drifting in nearly opposite directions. The two Voyagers were flung onto different paths by the worlds they passed, so one is climbing up out of the flat plane of the galaxy, and the other is heading down and away, carrying identical records further and further apart with every passing year. Whatever happens to the planet that made them, there will be two copies of the same message loose in the galaxy, separated by a gap that grows without end, each one a gold and copper disc gleaming faintly in the dark, each one with the same sounds in its grooves and the same clock on its cover, counting the same years in two places at once. We did not put all of it on a single object and hope. We made the message twice, and sent the copies in opposite directions into a dark that will almost certainly never open either. But set the odds aside for a moment, because the disc does one more thing, and it is the thing that turns all of this from a curiosity into something colder. The cover does not only carry a clock, it carries a map. Etched into the metal is a diagram showing where the disc came from, a set of directions, in effect, pointing the way back to Earth. The makers did not only send out a record of who we were, they signed it with an address. And once you put the address together with the clock, and with the billion years the disc is built to last, a question opens that the next part of this cannot avoid. If the record carries a map home, then what exactly is waiting at that address by the time anyone could ever follow it back? There is one more turn in this, and it is the one I find hardest to shake, because it is not about the distant stars at all. It is about us, and about a question I have been stepping around since the start. I am going to come back to it, and when I do not think it will let you look at the night sky the same way again. Set the timescales side by side, and the disc stops being a hopeful gesture and becomes something stranger. The record is built to stay legible for about 1 billion years. Voyager 1 will not even drift near another star for some 40,000 years, and that is a near miss, not a meeting. For the disc to actually be found and read, you are talking about spans of time that dwarf anything our species has lived through, almost certainly hundreds of thousands of years at the very least, and far more likely millions or hundreds of millions. Now ask the obvious question alongside that. Over spans like those, Is the civilization that made the disk still around to be visited? And the honest answer, looking at every relevant clock, is that it is overwhelmingly unlikely. Consider just the planet the map points back to. Earth will not stay the way it is. The sun is slowly brightening, as stars of its kind do, growing about 10% more luminous every billion years or so. That sounds gentle, and on a human scale it is nothing at all, but its end point is not gentle. In roughly a billion years, by most estimates, the rising heat will be enough to push Earth into a runaway warming, boiling off the oceans, stripping away the conditions that complex life depends on, turning the surface into something closer to a furnace than a garden. The disk is built to last about a billion years. The world it carries directions to has, in round terms, about a billion years left as a place anything could live. Those two numbers are not far apart. The record was made to outlast the habitability of its own home. So look at what the object actually is, laid out plainly. It is a greeting, recorded sounds and images of a living planet. It is a map, directions pointing the way back to that planet. And it is a clock, a patch of uranium that tells the finder exactly how long it has been since the disk was made. Put those three together, and the structure is unmistakable. It is a message that introduces a civilization, tells you where to find it, and stamps itself with the time elapsed since it was sent, all of it aimed at a moment when that civilization is, by every time scale we can measure, almost certainly gone. The finder, if there ever is one, does not receive a hello from the living. They receive a notice from the dead, complete with a return address that leads to an empty world and a clock confirming how long the silence has lasted. This is the part that turns me cold every time, and it is the center of everything we are talking about. We did not stumble into this. We did not send a cheerful note to the future and fail to notice the implication. The people who built that record understood the spans involved. They knew the odds, they knew the lifetimes, and they pressed the uranium clock onto the cover precisely because they understood that whoever found it would need to know how much time had passed, which is only a meaningful thing to tell someone if a great deal of time is expected to pass, which is only true if the senders expect to be long gone. We did not merely predict our own absence, we built it into the artifact. We signed our introduction to the universe with a decay rate, a quiet acknowledgement etched in metal that by the time these words are read, the ones who wrote them will be a thing that used to exist. There is a particular vertigo in recognizing that, and it is worth naming because it is the moment the whole question stops being abstract. We tend to think of our own extinction, if we think of it at all, as something far off and hypothetical, a story about a future we will never see. But out there right now, already most of the way to the edge of the sun's reach, there is a small gold and copper disk that treats our absence as a settled assumption, a premise built into its design, accurate down to the half-life of uranium. The most durable thing we have ever made is by its own construction a posthumous letter, and it is not waiting to become one. From the point of view of the deep future it is addressed to, it already is one. I want to be careful and not overstate it, because honesty is the whole point of this. We do not know that humanity will be extinct when, or if, the record is found. Our species could last far longer than the typical run. We could spread, change, persist in forms we cannot picture, still around in some shape when the disk finally drifts close to something that can read it. Nothing forces our ending, but every concrete number we can actually put a hand on points the same way. The disk lasts a billion years. The Earth has about a billion years of habitability left. The crossing to anything that could find the disk takes vastly longer than any civilization we know of has endured. Line those up, and the design of the record is not morbid. It is simply honest about the odds, in the same flat way the rest of this has tried to be. Stretch the planet's future out, and the scale of the gap becomes clear. The sun will not stay as it is. Over the coming hundreds of millions of years it brightens, and in roughly a billion years the oceans are likely gone, boiled into a thick and lifeless sky the surface grown too hot for anything we would call living. Long after that, in some 5 billion years, the sun will swell into an enormous red giant and swallow the inner planets, perhaps the Earth among them. Set the human against those numbers. Everything written down, every name remembered, every event in what we call history, fits inside a few thousand years. Our whole species fits inside a few 100,000. The disk is built to last 1 billion years, a span in which the Earth itself stops being a place anything can live. The record does not merely outlast us. It outlasts the habitability of the world it came from, and it was built to do exactly that. And nothing we know of bridges that gap. We have one example of a civilization able to make such a thing, and it has existed, in the sense that matters here, for less than a single century. Even the most generous guesses about how long a technological civilization might endure, 1,000 years, 10,000, 1,000,000, are a rounding error against the billion years the disk is built to survive, and against the far longer odds that anything finds it. So when we ask whether the senders will still be there when the record is read, we are not asking a close question. We are asking whether something that has lasted decades will still be present after spans that dwarf the entire history of our kind. Laid out that way, the design of the record stops looking hopeful and starts looking clear-eyed to the point of being cold. And we did not do it only once. The plaques on the Pioneers, the discs on the Voyagers, and a handful of signals we have deliberately aimed outward over the years all share the same buried structure. Each one introduces us, and each one, by the spans involved, is addressed to a future in which we are most likely already gone. We are, so far as we can tell, the only species that has ever built monuments to its own future absence, on purpose, and then launched them where almost no one will ever find them. There is something in that I cannot decide whether to call brave or unbearably lonely. We made things to outlast us, and signed them with the time of our absence, and sent them into a dark that will probably never read them, and we did it anyway. That is the moment in all of this where the floor drops away for me. We treat our own ending as distant, hypothetical, a story about a future no one we know will live to see, but it is already a settled premise in the design of the most durable thing we ever made, accurate to the half-life of uranium, drifting out past the edge of the sun's reach as you sit here. The most lasting mark of humanity is, by its own construction, a notice of our absence, and it is not waiting to become one. From the point of view of the deep time it is built for, it already is one, already a message from the dead, sent by people who understood exactly what they were sending. And the disk is not the only message we have aimed at a future where we will not be. There have been deliberate signals too, broadcasts sent on purpose toward the stars, and they carry the same buried structure stretched even further. One of the most famous of them was beamed once, long ago, toward a dense knot of stars so distant that the message will not arrive for around 25,000 years, and any reply, if one ever came, would take another 25,000 to return. Set that against the few thousand years of all our recorded history, and the gap is plain. We sent a greeting to a place we cannot reach, on a timescale across which our entire civilization is unlikely to survive, knowing that whoever might receive it would be receiving it from a sender already turned to legend, or to dust, or to nothing. So this is not a one-time accident of the Voyager record. It is a pattern in how we reach outward. Every time we have sent something deliberately into deep space, the distances have guaranteed that the receiving end, if there is one, lies far beyond any reasonable expectation of our own survival. We keep composing introductions whose own arithmetic assumes we will be gone before they land. And we do it knowing the arithmetic. That is the part that lifts it out of carelessness and into something stranger and more deliberate. A species repeatedly addressing a future it does not expect to be alive for, and signing each message in a way that lets the reader work out how long we have been gone. I should hold the other possibility open in fairness, because the whole point of this is to follow the honest line rather than the dramatic one. It is conceivable that we are early, It is conceivable that technological life is rare and recent, that we are among the first to reach this stage anywhere nearby, and that the galaxy is quiet not because it is full of the dead, but because the living have barely begun to appear. If that is true, then our messages are not notes from a graveyard, but some of the first notes ever sent, and the silence around us is the silence of a morning, rather than an evening. We cannot tell which it is, the same emptiness fits both. But notice that even the hopeful version does not rescue the senders. Whether we are among the last of a long line or among the first of a new one, the messages we have launched still outlast us by design, still travel for tens of thousands of years toward readers we will never meet, still carry a clock built to measure our absence, early or late, crowded galaxy or empty one. The structure of the thing does not change. We have made our most lasting marks in the form of letters that assume their writer is gone, and the assumption holds no matter which story about the galaxy turns out to be true. There is one more thing about the record that sets it apart from everything else we make. Almost every object a civilization builds is meant to be used while that civilization is alive. A tool, a building, a written page, all of them assume a living hand to take them up. The record is the rare exception. It is the one thing we have built whose entire function only begins once we are gone, a message designed to do its only job in a future that does not contain us. Its user is not us, and was never meant to be us. Its user is whatever comes long after, reading a notice from a sender who built the notice knowing they would not be there to see it delivered. We made, in effect, a tool whose purpose is our own absence, and then we polished it and aimed it and let it go. And once you see the golden record clearly, as a message whose own architecture assumes its senders are gone, a larger question opens underneath it, and it reaches far past one small disk. Because we are not the only thing that has ever sent a signal out into space. If our most deliberate message to the universe is by its very construction a notice from the dead, then what does that say about every other signal that might be crossing the galaxy right now? What if the structure we built into our record on purpose is the ordinary, unavoidable structure of every signal that any civilization anywhere has ever sent? That is the turn the next part has to take, and it changes the silence overhead from an emptiness into something far less empty and far harder to sit with. Take what we just found about our own record and apply it to everyone else. A signal, once sent, keeps travelling long after its source has stopped. Light and radio do not need the sender to stay alive. They leave, they spread, they cross the dark at the one fixed speed, and they go on crossing it whether the world that made them still turns or burned away ages ago. Our radio shell will keep expanding outward for as long as it holds together, even if the earth below it goes silent tomorrow. The same has to be true of anyone else who ever transmitted. Their signals are still out there, still moving, regardless of whether they are. Now bring in the one number that decides everything, and that nobody can pin down. For a long time, people have tried to estimate how many detectable civilizations might exist in the galaxy at once, and when you break that estimate into its parts, almost all of them you can at least argue about with real evidence. How many stars there are, how many have planets, how many of those planets could host life. But there is one term in the chain that we have essentially no grip on, and it turns out to be the one that dominates the whole result. It is the question of how long a civilization stays detectable. How long, on average, between a world first making a signal and that world falling silent for good, whether by ending or by going quiet or by changing into something that no longer leaks into space. Here is why that single number rules everything. Suppose a typical civilization is detectable for only a short while, a few centuries say, before it goes quiet one way or another. The galaxy is 100,000 light years across. A civilization detectable for a few centuries produces a signal shell only a few hundred light years thick, a thin spreading bubble that then keeps travelling outward for 100,000 years or more after the source has gone silent, long after there is anyone left behind it. So at any given moment, the galaxy could be threaded with these shells, expanding rings of old signal from worlds that fell quiet ages ago, each one a thin, bright skin around a dark and empty center. The signals would still be in flight. The senders would be long gone, and from the outside there would be no way at all to tell the two apart. That is the thought that turns the silence overhead into something other than emptiness. We look up and we hear nothing, and the easy reading is that nothing is there. But if detectable lifetimes are short compared to the size and age of the galaxy, then a sky that sounds empty and a sky full of the long dead would look almost exactly the same. The shells from vanished civilizations would mostly have already swept past us and moved on, or not yet arrived, or be too faint by the time they reach us to separate from the noise, the same way our own shell is already too faint to hear from any real distance. The great silence might not be the silence of an empty galaxy, it might be the silence of a crowded graveyard, where the markers are all still in transit and we simply cannot read them. And a received signal carries nothing that would settle it. If a clear transmission did reach us tomorrow, from some star 1,000 light years off, the most it could honestly tell us is that someone was there 1,000 years ago when the signal set out. It would say nothing whatever about whether they are there still. By the time their light reaches us, their civilization could have lasted, or ended, or transformed beyond recognition, and the signal would look identical in every case. It is a message with no date of death attached, from a sender who may have stopped existing while it was still on the road. Every signal in the galaxy has this property. None of them can tell you whether the one who sent it is still alive. I have to be plain that this is the most speculative ground in everything we are covering, and I will not dress it up as more than it is. We do not know that detectable lifetimes are short. We have exactly one example of a technological civilization to reason from, and it is us, and we cannot yet read our own length. We do not know if we are near the start of a run that lasts 1,000,000 years or near the end of one that lasts a few centuries more. The entire argument that the galaxy is full of the already gone rests on a number we cannot measure, drawn from a sample of one. It could be wrong, the lifetimes could be long, the galaxy genuinely sparse, the silence honestly empty. I am not telling you it is otherwise. I am telling you that we cannot rule it out, and that the shape of the physics makes it disturbingly easy to imagine. The estimate people use for this has a handful of links in it, and most of them have firmed up over the years. We now know that planets are common, that worlds in the temperate range around their stars are common, that the raw ingredients of life are spread widely through space. Link after link has moved from guesswork towards something we can measure, but the last link in the chain has not moved at all, because it cannot, not yet. It is the question of longevity, of how long a civilization that becomes detectable stays detectable before it ends, or falls silent, or changes into something that no longer leaks. Every other term you can chip away at with telescopes. This one you cannot, because we have only ever watched a single civilization from the inside for less than a century, and that is nowhere near enough to know the lifespan of the kind. And that one unmeasured number swamps everything, because of how thin a short-lived signal is against the size of the galaxy. The galaxy is about 100,000 light years across. Suppose a civilization stays detectable for 1,000 years, which would already be far longer than our own run so far. Its signals form a shell only 1,000 light years thick, and then that shell keeps expanding outward for the next 100,000 years and more, long after the world inside it has gone quiet. So at any moment, the galaxy could hold a scattering of these expanding shells, each one a thin skin of old signal racing outward around a dark and empty center, the senders long gone, the evidence still in flight. A galaxy that had been busy with life for ages, but in which each light winked on and then off again briefly, would look, right now, almost entirely dark, with only these thin moving shells threaded through it, most of them missing us entirely, either in space or in time. This puts a different face on the old puzzle of why the sky is so quiet. The usual worry is that the universe looks empty when life ought to be common, and people reach for grim explanations that something reliably ends civilizations young, that we are alone, that no one is out there at all. But there is a quieter possibility folded into the physics. The sky could be quiet not because no one was ever there, but because being there and being heard are separated by time as much as by distance. The signals of the long gone could have already swept past us before we knew to listen, or not yet reached us, or arrived too faint to notice. The silence we hear might not be the silence of an empty galaxy. It might be the ordinary silence of a galaxy where nearly everyone who ever spoke has already fallen quiet, and their voices are still somewhere in the mail. I will say again, because it matters, that this is a possibility and not a finding. We do not know that lifetimes are short. We cannot measure the one number the whole argument turns on. The galaxy could just as honestly be nearly empty. The silence could be the plain silence of absence, and the graveyard picture could be a story we are telling ourselves from a sample of one. I am not asking you to believe the galaxy is full of the dead. I am asking you to notice that the physics makes it disturbingly easy to arrange, and that if it were true, it would look exactly like what we see, which is nothing at all. And I am asking you to notice the one thing the whole picture refuses to let us stand outside of, which is that we are in it. Whatever is true of all those other shells is true of ours. There is a further twist that makes the silence even harder to read, and it is about the difference between hearing a signal and answering one. Suppose, against the odds, that a clear message did reach us tomorrow from a star 1,000 light years away. We would learn that someone was there 1,000 years ago. If we answered at once, our reply would take another 1,000 years to arrive, and any response to that another 1,000 on top. A single exchange of greetings would span thousands of years, far longer than the civilization sending the first message is likely to have lasted, far longer than ours is likely to last to receive the end of it. So even detection, if it ever came, would not be contact. It would be the receipt of a letter from someone who, by every reasonable measure, is already gone, with no possibility of writing back to anyone who could read the reply. That is the quiet cruelty folded into the size of the place. The distances that hide everyone from everyone also make conversation impossible across them. The galaxy could be dense with civilizations, and they could still never speak to one another, each one detecting, at most, the ancient signals of the others, each one always too far and too slow to close the loop before the speakers on both ends had ended. Connection is not merely unlikely, it is, across these gaps, structurally ruled out, leaving only the one-way traffic of signals from the past, arriving at observers who can never reply to a living recipient. And we are not standing outside this as observers of it. We are one of its entries right now, adding our own thin shell to whatever else is out there. From the vantage of some far world, we are precisely the distant flicker that cannot be confirmed, the source whose presence is sealed away behind the crossing time of light. They would receive our radar, or our reflected light, or eventually our drifting disk, and they would learn only that we were here at some moment in their deep past, with no way to know whether we still are. We do to them simply by existing and sending exactly what every other source does to us. We are someone's unanswerable letter, someone's flicker of a maybe vanished world. So the picture closes on itself. Whether the galaxy is a graveyard or a nursery, whether the silence is full or genuinely empty, the one thing that holds in every version is that no source can ever confirm the presence of any other. Every signal is old on arrival. Every sender may be gone. Every receiver is to someone further out, a sender who may be gone in turn. We are not asking a question with a hidden answer when we ask whether we are still here. We are noticing, finally, that the question itself dissolves the moment it has to cross any real distance, and that from far enough away, the difference between a living humanity and a vanished one is a difference the universe has no instrument to register. There will be a night, sooner or later, when the light of Betelgeuse ending finally reaches us, and the next day people will say that Betelgeuse exploded, that it happened, that we saw it go. But it will not have happened then. In our own reckoning, it will have ended 6.5 centuries earlier, the light only now arriving, and in the deeper sense there will be no single moment at which it happened at all, only the long crossing of the light and the night it lands on us. The headline will be wrong, in a way no one will mind and no one can fix, because the language of happened and now was never built for distances like that. And the same wrong headline could be written about us, somewhere out there, on some night when our last light arrives at a world we never knew was watching. They will say Earth is there, alive, present, on the strength of a light that left us long ago, and they will have no way to know they are reading an old page of a story that may have already closed. But notice where this has quietly carried us, because it is the turn I promised and have been circling since the start. Everything I have just said about other civilizations, about signals outliving their senders, about a sky that cannot tell the living from the dead, applies to one civilization in particular without a single change. It applies to us. Our radio shell is one of those expanding skins. Our golden disk is one of those messages with no death date attached. From far enough away, we are indistinguishable from a civilization that ended long ago, because the thing in transit looks the same either way. And that force is the most unsettling version of this whole question, the one that is not about distant strangers at all. It is about how we look, right now, to anything out there with the distance to see us. So turn the telescope around. Point yourself outward and ask not what we can see, but how we are seen.
Take an observer somewhere out near Betelgeuse, the red star that marks the shoulder of Orion, roughly 650 light-years from here. The light leaving Earth tonight, carrying everything we are at this moment, will not reach that vantage for 6.5 centuries. So the humanity an observer there can see right now is not us. It is the humanity of 650 years ago, a medieval world, no electricity, no radio, no sign at all of the things we think of as us.
To anything at Betelgeuse, we have not happened yet.
The version of Earth they are watching is one where everything you know about your own species is still centuries in the future.
Now go further, to the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away, the same Andromeda from the walk earlier. The light leaving Earth tonight will take 2.5 million years to cross to it, so an observer there, looking at Earth now, sees a world with no humans on it whatsoever. They see our planet as it was before our species existed, before the first members of our kind stood up on the plains, an Earth of other animals under a familiar sun. To them, watching in their present, humanity is not a thing that has ended and not a thing that is happening. It is a thing that has not yet begun. We are, from their distance, purely in the future, not yet born into the picture they are able to see. Hold those two together, because between them they break the question we started with. To the observer at Betelgeuse, we are 6 centuries in their past and have not reached the modern world. To the observer at Andromeda, we do not exist yet at all. To someone on Earth, we are obviously here, now, alive. 3 observers, 3 completely different answers to the simple question of whether humanity exists. And from the last section we know there is no 4th observer, no view from nowhere, who holds the correct one. There is no single present that all 3 share, in which the matter could be settled. We are, at the very same instant, not yet born, fully alive, and centuries into a past that has not caught up, all depending only on where the question is asked from. And the part that closes the loop is this. The very same logic that lets us say a distant star might already be dead while its light still reaches us, works in reverse on every one of us. We look at Betelgeuse and we know it is living on borrowed sight. It is a swollen old star near the end of its life, and the best estimates give it something like a 1 in a few thousand chance of having already collapsed, already torn itself apart in a supernova, with the flash of it still crossing the 650 light-years toward us, not yet arrived. We might be looking, tonight, at a star that no longer exists, and we would have no way to know until the light of its death finally reached us, possibly centuries from now. We accept that about Betelgeuse easily. It feels like a fact about a faraway star. But there is nothing special about Betelgeuse in this. The same is true of us, seen from out there. To the observer who sees our medieval past, our modern selves are exactly the kind of thing that might already have ended without the news having travelled. To them, the question of whether the humanity that will eventually appear in their sky still exists when its light arrives is precisely the question we ask about that red star. We are someone's Betelgeuse. We are the source whose present cannot be confirmed, whose light is on the way, who might be flourishing or might be long finished, with no signal, able to outrun the gap and tell the difference. The unsettling thing we say so calmly about a dying star is a thing the universe says just as calmly about us. This is the point where the intuition fights back hardest, and I do not think it ever fully stops fighting, so I will not pretend it does. It feels like there has to be a real answer to whether we exist this instant. It feels like the universe, regardless of who can see what, must be doing something definite right now, everywhere at once, and that surely in that true present we either are here or we are not. I feel the pull of that as strongly as anyone, but it is the same instinct from earlier, the belief in a master clock behind everything, and the physics keeps giving the same answer. There is no such clock. Out beyond a certain distance, the question of whether we exist right now does not have a hidden true answer that we merely cannot reach. It has no answer at all, because the shared present it would need has come apart into a fan of equally valid nows, in some of which we are here and in some of which we are already gone. So the question we opened with finally shows its real face. When we ask whether humanity is already extinct, we are not asking something that the universe is keeping a secret from us. We are asking something the universe has no way to answer, because the form of the question assumes a single now that does not exist across these distances. In some frames our ending has happened, in some it has not, in most it is not even a coherent thing to ask. There is no cosmic verdict waiting to be uncovered. There is only the light we have sent fanning outward, reaching different observers at different times, showing each of them a different Earth, none of them the present, all of them equally real. Fill in the distances between the two extremes and you get a gradient, a smear of different versions of us laid out across space. An observer at a star 100 light-years away, near the very edge of our radio shell, would be seeing the Earth of around a century ago, a planet only just beginning to broadcast, the first faint signals arriving now. An observer 400 light-years off sees a world before any of that, sees our older light carrying a planet that had not yet learned to make a sound. The one at 650, beside Betelgeuse, sees a medieval Earth. The one in Andromeda sees no humans on the planet at all. There is no single us spread across the sky. There is a continuous gradient of former selves, each distance holding a different age of the planet, all of them real, all of them present for whoever stands at that distance, and not one of them now. And it is not only distance that slices us this way. Remember the two walkers and their disagreement about Andromeda. Motion does the same thing to the question of us. An observer far away who is drifting toward us, and one who is drifting away, at even a gentle pace, will place the present of Earth at different points along our history, their nows sliding across our timeline by the very same trick that slid their nows across Andromeda's. So it is not even that each distance fixes one version of us. Each distance, combined with each possible motion, picks out its own, and the set of all of them is a haze of Earths spread across the whole of our past, no single one of which the universe will ever single out as the true present. Go back to Betelgeuse and let it land, because it is the cleanest mirror we have. It is a red supergiant near the end of its life, 650 light-years off, swollen and unstable, and it will end in a supernova, a blast that for a few weeks will outshine everything else in the night and be plain even in daylight. The estimates give it some small chance, perhaps one in a few thousand, of having already done so, the flash already on its way to us, simply not yet arrived. So tonight, looking up at the shoulder of Orion, you may be looking at a star that no longer exists, and you would have no way to tell. We say that easily about Betelgeuse. The hard turn is to say it about ourselves. To the observer who sees our medieval light, we are exactly that, a source whose present cannot be confirmed, that might be thriving or might be finished, with no signal able to outrun the gap and settle which. We are someone's Betelgeuse. We are the star that might already be gone. Hold on to one strange detail about what a distant observer actually receives, because it sharpens everything. When the light that left Earth tonight finally reaches some far world, it will not arrive as news of an event that happened over there at a matching moment. There is no matching moment. It will simply arrive, and to that observer it will be the present face of Earth, the only Earth they have, regardless of what the real planet is doing by then, or whether it is doing anything at all. Their now of us is fixed entirely by the crossing time of light, and it can be a different age of our world for every distance and every motion. None of those ages more correct than the others. The Earth they hold as present is genuinely present for them, and genuinely centuries or ages out of date by any reckoning we would use, and both of those things are true at once with nothing to break the tie. The same applies to that red star on Orion's shoulder, and it is worth being precise about why. When Betelgeuse ends, there will be no shared instant at which it exploded for everyone. For us, the explosion simply is the arrival of its light, brightening our sky one night with no warning, and that arrival could be tonight, or in 1,000 years, or it could be the delayed news of a death that already happened centuries ago. There is no fact of the matter, hidden behind our sky, about whether Betelgeuse exists at this moment, because this moment does not reach across 650 light years. There is only the light still arriving, and the light not yet here, and what is true of the star is true of us, seen from its distance. We are a source whose ending, if it comes, will not happen at any instant the universe agrees on, but will simply, eventually, stop being added to the light that carries us outward. I keep landing on the same place when I follow this all the way down. The instinct that there must be a true present, a real answer to whether we exist this second, is the deepest instinct we have about time, and it is the one the universe most plainly refuses to honor at a distance. Out beyond our small local patch, the question of whether we are here right now is not unanswered. It is unasked in the sense that the conditions for it to mean anything are simply not there. There is no referee, no master clock, no view from nowhere holding the verdict. There is the light we have sent, fanning outward at its fixed speed, becoming the present of Earth for one observer after another, each of them meeting a different version of us, all of those versions real, and not one of them the living moment we are actually in as we ask the question. Which leaves one thing still standing, and it is the thing the last stretch of this has to be about. If nothing far away can hold our present, and the answer to whether we are here changes with every observer and every motion, then the obvious next question is what, if anything, is actually and durably true about us. Strip away the present tense that does not stretch, the now that does not span the distance, and ask what genuinely remains, what the universe can be said to hold of humanity for certain, no matter who is looking or from how far. What survives is the thing in transit, not the planet, not the people, not the present moment that cannot be shared across the distance anyway, but the light and the metal already on their way outward, crossing the dark, carrying a version of us toward observers who will read it long after the moment it left. That is the part of humanity the universe can actually be said to hold. Gather everything we have walked through, and it points to one quiet, strange conclusion. The signal is the durable thing. The sender is in the cosmic accounting almost incidental. Lay the pieces out one more time, plainly. The present cannot reach across the distance, so no far observer can ever hold the living us. Our loudest living signal, the radio shell, is faint and spreading and fading towards silence, barely a whisper by the time it arrives anywhere. Our most durable mark, the golden disk, is a clock built to outlast the very world it points back to. From far enough away, we are indistinguishable from a civilization that ended long ago, and in some frames we may already belong to that category. Put all of that together and the same answer keeps surfacing. What remains of us, in every direction, is not us. It is the thing we sent, still travelling, after the moment of sending is gone. So picture what is genuinely out there with our name on it right now. While you sit here, there is the shell of old radio, expanding past the nearer stars, thinning as it goes, the murmur of a few loud decades spreading outward at the speed of light and growing quieter with every year of distance. There is the golden disk on the side of Voyager, drifting toward a red dwarf it will not reach for 40,000 years. Its uranium counting off the time in the cold and the dark, indifferent to whether a hand ever lifts it. And there is the light of the planet itself, ordinary reflected sunlight, leaving Earth in every direction at every instant, carrying the look of our world out into space, reaching the nearer stars in years and the further ones in centuries and the far galaxies in millions of years, each of them receiving an Earth from a different stretch of its story, none of them the Earth of right now. That is the humanity the universe carries. Not a living thing it can check on, but a set of slowly travelling images and objects, each one already out of date the instant it set out, each one continuing on its own long after the moment it captured has passed. The light that left us 1,000 years ago is 1,000 light years out by now, showing a medieval Earth to whatever is out there to receive it, and it will go on showing that Earth faithfully, forever, regardless of anything that happens here. The sender ends. The signal keeps going, and that is not a poetic way of speaking. It is just a flat description of what is physically left when you take away the present tense that does not stretch. I keep being struck by how this inverts the way we usually think of ourselves. We treat the living planet as the real thing, and the signals as mere echoes of it, faint copies, less important than the original. But the original is exactly the part the universe cannot keep. The present moment on Earth is local, fragile, unreachable from any distance, gone almost as soon as it happens. The echoes are what endure. The radio, the disk, the outbound light, these are the parts of us that get to persist, the parts that travel, the parts that anything beyond our small neighborhood will ever have a chance to encounter. In the long reckoning, we are not the planet. We are the things that left it. I should be honest about what this does and does not tell us, because it would be easy to slide from this into a kind of false comfort, and the comfort would not be earned. None of this says we will last. None of it promises that humanity has a long run ahead, or that our signals will ever be found, or that any of it will mean anything to anyone. The disk will almost certainly drift unread. The radio will almost certainly fade unheard. What this tells us is narrower and stranger than reassurance. It tells us that lasting and being seen to last are two different things, separated by light years that nothing can cross fast enough to join them. We could endure for ages and never be detected. We could end tomorrow and go on appearing alive, in the light already sent, for as long as that light keeps arriving somewhere. Existence and the evidence of existence have come apart, and the gap between them is the size of the distances themselves. Turn that over and it reverses the order of importance we usually assume. We take the living planet to be the real thing, and the signals to be thin copies, echoes that matter less than their source. But the source is exactly the part that cannot be kept. The present on Earth is local and fragile, unreachable from any distance, gone almost the instant it happens, sealed off behind the speed of light from everything beyond our own small neighborhood. The echoes are what get to endure. The outbound light, the expanding radio, the drifting disk, these are the parts of us with any future out there. the parts that travel, the parts anything beyond us could ever actually meet. In the long accounting, the copies outlast the original, because the original was never something the universe could hold in the first place. So this is what is genuinely out there with us in it, right now, while you sit here. A shell of old radio, expanding past the nearer stars, thinning steadily towards silence, a small disk of gold and copper, drifting toward a star it will not reach for 40,000 years, its uranium counting in the cold, and the plain light of the planet, leaving in every direction at every instant, carrying an Earth from a different age out to every distance, an unbroken outbound archive of every moment the world has ever had. That is the humanity the universe carries. Not a living thing it can check on, but a set of slowly travelling pictures and objects, each one already old the moment it left, each one going on long after the moment that made it has passed. And the gap between existing and being seen to exist is the whole of it. We could endure for ages and never once be noticed, our signals too faint, our disk unfound, the galaxy never turning to look our way. We could end tomorrow and go on appearing perfectly alive, in the light already sent, for as long as that light keeps arriving somewhere new. Being and the evidence of being have come apart, and the distance between them is the size of space itself, a gap that nothing can cross quickly enough to close. The universe will never hold the fact of us, it will only ever hold the light of us, always late, always partial, always from a sender who, by the time the signal lands, may be anything at all or nothing. There is a permanent mismatch built into all of this, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The record of us that the universe carries is always out of step with the us that is here. The light 1,000 light years out shows a medieval Earth and will keep showing it, faithfully, for as long as that light travels, no matter what becomes of the real planet. The light from this very year will show this year's Earth to whatever it reaches, ages from now, long after this year is gone. So the version of us spread across space is never the current one, it is an archive permanently behind the present, each layer accurate to the moment it left and wrong about every moment since, an outbound history that can never catch up to the place it came from, because the place it came from keeps moving on, and the history travels at a fixed speed away from it. So when I ask what is actually durably true about us, the answer turns out to be smaller and stranger than I expected, and also harder to take away. It is not that we exist right now, because right now does not reach. It is not that we will last, because nothing here promises that. What is durably true is only this: we were here at these particular moments, and we sent this particular light, and that light is real and is travelling and will go on arriving somewhere for as long as it holds together. It is a fact with no tense to it, or rather a fact stuck permanently in the past tense, the only tense the universe can keep of anyone. We were here, the light says so. It will keep saying so after we are not. And that is the thing I want to carry into the close, because it is where all of this has been heading from the first 8 minutes. We began with the nearest star, and the small late picture of it, that is the only picture we are ever allowed. Everything since has been the same fact, widened out, until it covers not just the sun, but us, our signal, our disk, our whole outbound record, all of it light in transit from a sender the universe can never quite confirm is still there. So let me come back to the sun, and to those 8 minutes, and say plainly what I have come to think it means. So when I sit with the question we started with, whether humanity is already extinct, I find it has quietly changed into something I can almost hold. It is not a question about a hidden fact, it is a description of our situation. We are a sender whose signal has already left, scattered outward in light and radio and metal, and from the point of view of nearly all of space, the sender and the signal are no longer the same event. One of them is here now briefly, in a present that does not reach. The other is out there, travelling in a form that will outlast the moment that made it. And that is the thing I want to sit with, plainly, before we close, because it is the closest I have come to saying what this is actually about. I keep coming back to the sun, and to those 8 minutes. We never once see it as it is. Not the nearest star we have, the single thing holding us in place and keeping us alive. We only ever get the version it was, handed to us a little late, and the longer I sit with that, the less the word now seems to mean anything out there at all. There is no cosmic present tense, there is only what has arrived, and what is still on its way. So when I ask whether humanity is already gone, I have stopped hearing it as a morbid question. I hear it as an honest description of where we stand. To anything far enough away, we are already nothing but a signal in flight. A thin shell of old radio thinning into noise, a small metal disc drifting toward a red star it will not reach for 40,000 years, carrying a patch of uranium that keeps perfect time whether or not anyone is ever there to read it. That clock does not need us. It will go on counting long after the sun has swollen and the seas have boiled away, and the last person who knew what the disc was for is gone. The message will still be true. The sender will simply have become a thing that used to exist. I do not find that bleak so much as clarifying. We were here. The light still says so. And the light does not need us in order to keep saying it. If you would like more of these, a subscribe is the simplest way to keep them coming.